Admiral Marcus Thompson was not a man who stood out in a crowd, at least not when he wanted to blend in. On this particular day, he had traded his crisp Navy uniform for a simple pair of jeans, a polo shirt, and a leather jacket. It wasn't often that he got to fly commercial, but after an exhausting week at a military conference, the idea of relaxing on a plane sounded perfect. Little did he know, this flight would turn into something far more eventful than he had anticipated. As Marcus approached the gate, the usual hum of travelers filled the air. Kids fidgeting with toys, parents scrolling through their phones, and the occasional announcement crackling over the intercom. He handed his boarding pass to Karen Jenkins, the gate agent, with a polite smile. She glanced at it briefly before her expression shifted. Her lips tightened, and her eyes flicked up to study him from head to toe. For a moment, Marcus felt like he was under a microscope, though he couldn't quite place why. "Sir," Karen said, her tone clipped, "I'm sorry, but your ticket doesn't match our records for first-class seating." Marcus frowned, confused. "That's strange," he replied calmly. "I have confirmation right here." He pointed to the printed email attached to his boarding pass, which clearly stated his upgrade. But instead of double-checking or offering assistance, Karen crossed her arms and leaned back slightly, as if putting distance between herself and the problem. "I don't see anything about first class," she said flatly, tapping the screen of her computer. "You'll need to sit in economy." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Something about her demeanor didn't sit right. Her voice carried a note of finality, as though she'd already decided there was no point in discussing it further. Around them, other passengers began to notice the exchange. The businessmen waiting in line gave Marcus a sympathetic look, while a young couple whispered to each other, glancing between Marcus and Karen. "Could you please check again?" Marcus asked, keeping his tone steady. "It's a standard procedure for officers of my rank to receive complimentary upgrades." Karen's mouth twitched into what might have been a smirk, or maybe it was just irritation. "Rank?" she echoed, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Sir, I'm going to need some proof of that." "Proof?" Marcus almost laughed. In all his years of service, he'd never been asked to justify his position so bluntly, especially not by someone whose job was simply to scan tickets. Still, he reached into his bag and pulled out his military ID card. The golden insignia of a Navy admiral gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the terminal. He slid it across the counter toward Karen, expecting her to apologize and correct the mistake. Instead, she barely glanced at it. "This doesn't change anything," she muttered, pushing the ID back toward him. "Your reservation is coach, sir. Next." The word "sir" sounded forced, almost mocking. Marcus clenched his jaw, but nodded curtly. There was no use arguing. He knew how these situations sometimes played out. As he stepped aside to let the next passenger approach the counter, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about a seating arrangement. It was about something deeper, something uglier. And he wondered if anyone else could see it too. Marcus walked away from the counter, his mind racing but his steps steady. He didn't want to make a scene, but the sting of Karen's dismissive attitude lingered like an itch he couldn't scratch. As he moved through the crowded boarding area, he noticed the subtle shifts in energy around him. Some passengers shot him curious glances, while others pretended not to notice. A young woman with a toddler in tow gave him a small apologetic smile, as if silently acknowledging that something unfair had just happened. Marcus nodded back, appreciating the gesture even though it didn't change the situation. He found his seat in economy class and settled into the cramped space, adjusting the armrests and trying to get comfortable. But comfort was hard to come by, not because of the narrow seats or lack of legroom, but because his thoughts kept circling back to Karen's behavior. Why had she been so quick to assume he didn't belong in first class? Was it his casual clothes, his skin color, or was it something else entirely? Some unconscious bias she wasn't even aware of. As the minutes ticked by, more passengers boarded the plane. Marcus watched them file past, some heading confidently toward the front of the cabin, while others took their places in coach. He couldn't help but notice how different Karen's demeanor became when interacting with certain travelers. For instance, there was a white man in a business suit who approached the gate last minute, flustered and out of breath. When he explained that he'd accidentally booked the wrong seat, Karen smiled warmly and assured him everything would be fine. Within moments, she had upgraded him to first class without hesitation. Marcus clenched his fists under the armrests, feeling a mix of frustration and resignation. He'd seen this kind of thing before, countless times, in fact. It wasn't always blatant racism. Sometimes it was subtler, like a shadow creeping across the room. People made assumptions based on appearances, and those assumptions could shape entire interactions. Marcus had learned over the years to pick his battles, but that didn't mean they didn't leave a mark. The plane began to fill up, and soon the flight attendants were making their final checks. Karen appeared one last time at the entrance of the aircraft, scanning the cabin with a clipboard in hand. Her eyes landed on Marcus for a brief second, and though her expression remained neutral, he felt the weight of her earlier dismissal lingering between them. She turned away quickly, focusing instead on a group of elderly passengers who needed assistance stowing their bags. Sitting there, Marcus reflected on his career, the long nights, the sacrifices, the moments of triumph that had brought him to where he was today. He thought about the countless missions he'd led, the lives he'd touched, and the respect he'd earned from colleagues around the world. Yet here he was, reduced to just another passenger, because someone behind a desk had decided he didn't fit the image of what a first-class traveler should look like. Despite the anger simmering beneath the surface, Marcus refused to let it consume him. He reminded himself of the bigger picture. This wasn't just about him. It was about all the people who faced similar challenges every single day. It was about the young black boy dreaming of becoming a pilot, the college student working twice as hard to prove herself, the mother juggling jobs while raising her kids. Each of them deserved to be seen for who they truly were, not judged by stereotypes or preconceived notions. As the engines roared to life and the plane taxied down the runway, Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He didn't know what lay ahead on this journey, but one thing was certain. He wouldn't let anyone dim the light of his accomplishments or his dignity. As the plane climbed higher into the sky, Marcus tried to focus on the view outside his window. The clouds stretched endlessly, glowing softly in the sunlight, but his mind kept wandering back to the events at the gate. He replayed Karen's dismissive tone and the way she'd brushed him off like he was invisible. It wasn't just her actions that bothered him. It was the ease with which they had unfolded, as if it were second nature to treat someone like this based on unspoken biases. The flight attendants began their routine safety demonstration, but Marcus barely paid attention. Instead, he glanced around the cabin, observing the other passengers. A businessman in a crisp suit sat nearby, typing furiously on his laptop. Across the aisle, an elderly couple held hands, whispering quietly to each other. Further down, a young mother struggled to calm her restless toddler while juggling a diaper bag and a cup of juice. Everyone seemed absorbed in their own little worlds, oblivious to the tension simmering inside Marcus. Just as the seatbelt sign turned off, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. The sudden jolt sent a ripple of panic through the cabin. Passengers gripped their armrests, and a few gasped audibly. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, assuring everyone that everything was under control. "We're experiencing some minor bumps," he said calmly. "Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." But not everyone stayed calm. Karen, who had taken a seat several rows ahead of Marcus, leaned forward anxiously, clutching the edge of her tray table. Her knuckles turned white as the plane shook again. Then, unable to contain herself, she called out loudly enough for those around her to hear. "This always happens when you let certain people argue about seating." Her words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Marcus didn't need to ask who she was referring to. He could feel the weight of her glare piercing through the cabin. Several passengers turned to look at him, their expressions ranging from confusion to sympathy. One older man sitting across from Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly catching the implication in Karen's comment. A teenage girl with headphones slung around her neck exchanged a glance with her friend, shaking her head slightly. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Part of him wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand an explanation for her petty jab. But another part of him, the part shaped by years of discipline and leadership, knew better. He reminded himself that reacting impulsively wouldn't solve anything. Still, the sting of her words lingered, gnawing at him like a splinter buried deep beneath the skin. To distract himself, Marcus pulled out a book he'd been meaning to read. It was a biography of a trailblazing civil rights leader, someone who had faced adversity with grace and resilience. As he flipped through the pages, he found comfort in the stories of perseverance. These were reminders that challenges like this weren't new. They were part of a much larger struggle that spanned generations. The turbulence eventually subsided, and the cabin settled into a quiet rhythm once again. Karen relaxed slightly in her seat, though she continued to shoot furtive glances toward Marcus. Meanwhile, the young mother managed to soothe her child, singing a soft lullaby that echoed gently through the cabin. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, letting the melody wash over him. In that brief pause, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, centering his thoughts. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. Something about Karen's behavior told him she wasn't done. Not yet. And Marcus also knew that when the time came, he would respond, not with anger, but with clarity and purpose. For now, though, he chose to sit quietly, conserving his energy for whatever lay ahead. After all, storms don't last forever, and neither do people who try to diminish others without cause. The turbulence had settled, but the tension in the cabin remained thick, like a fog that refused to lift. Marcus sat still, his hands resting on his lap, as he tried to focus on the book in front of him. Yet every few minutes, he could feel Karen's eyes darting toward him from her seat several rows ahead. She wasn't subtle about it. Her glances were deliberate, almost challenging, as if she wanted to make sure he knew she was watching. It was exhausting, this constant awareness of being judged, even in silence. Karen wasn't done stirring the pot. When the flight attendants began their beverage service, she flagged one down and asked for a cup of coffee. As the attendant handed it to her, Karen leaned forward slightly, speaking just loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "I don't know why some people can't just accept things the way they are," she said, her voice dripping with irritation. "It's not like we're running a charity here." The comment hung in the air like a bad smell, impossible to ignore. Several passengers turned their heads, trying to figure out who she was talking about. Marcus didn't need to look up to know the target of her words. He felt the weight of her insinuation pressing down on him, heavy and suffocating. But instead of reacting, he kept his gaze fixed on his book, pretending not to notice. Inside, though, his frustration bubbled quietly, like water simmering before it boils over. Around him, the reactions varied. The businessman typing on his laptop glanced up briefly, his brow furrowed in confusion. The elderly couple exchanged worried looks, clearly uncomfortable with the growing hostility in the air. Even the young mother, who had been focused on keeping her toddler entertained, paused mid-sentence during a game of peekaboo, sensing the shift in energy. Some passengers seemed annoyed by Karen's behavior, while others appeared indifferent, content to mind their own business. Marcus couldn't help but wonder how often scenes like this played out in everyday life. How many times had someone like Karen used veiled comments or outright rudeness to assert dominance over someone else? And how many times had those on the receiving end simply swallowed their pride and moved on, unwilling or unable to confront the situation? It was a cycle that repeated itself endlessly, hidden beneath layers of politeness or ignored altogether. For Marcus, this wasn't just about one gate agent's attitude. It was about the cumulative effect of moments like these. Each dismissal, each snide remark, added another brick to the wall of prejudice that so many people of color faced daily. He thought about his own children, bright and full of potential, and wondered how many times they might encounter someone like Karen in their lives. Would they learn to navigate these situations with grace, as he had, or would they grow weary of constantly having to prove themselves? As the plane continued its journey, the atmosphere grew quieter. Most passengers returned to their books, phones, or conversations, eager to distract themselves from the discomfort. But Marcus noticed something interesting. A few people were watching him now, their expressions thoughtful. A teenage boy in the row behind him gave him a small nod when their eyes met, as if silently acknowledging the unfairness of what had happened. An older woman seated near the window smiled warmly at Marcus, her eyes conveying understanding without needing words. These small gestures mattered. They reminded Marcus that not everyone turned a blind eye to injustice. There were allies everywhere, even in the most unexpected places, and their quiet support meant more than they might realize. Still, Marcus knew better than to rely on validation from strangers. What mattered most was staying true to himself, no matter how others chose to act. By the time the pilot announced their descent, Marcus had made up his mind. He wouldn't let Karen's behavior define his experience. Not today. Not ever. Whatever happened next, he would handle it with dignity and purpose. After all, storms may shake the plane, but they don't determine its destination. And Marcus was determined to land exactly where he belonged, standing tall, unshaken, and ready to face whatever came next. The plane touched down smoothly, and the passengers began gathering their belongings, eager to disembark after the long flight. Marcus took his time, letting others shuffle past him as he collected his bag from the overhead compartment. He wasn't in a rush. Something told him this story wasn't over yet. As he stepped into the aisle, he noticed Karen already at the front of the cabin, chatting animatedly with another gate agent near the exit. Her body language was relaxed now, her earlier tension replaced by smug confidence. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then decided to approach her. Not because he wanted to provoke an argument, but because he knew moments like these mattered. They were opportunities to confront bias head-on, to remind people that actions have consequences. He walked up calmly, his presence commanding attention without being aggressive. When Karen spotted him, her smile faltered slightly, but she quickly masked it with indifference. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice steady and clear. "Do you remember me? We met earlier at the gate." Karen blinked, caught off guard. For a split second, uncertainty flickered across her face, but she recovered quickly. "Yes, I do," she replied, her tone clipped. "Is there something else you need?" Marcus nodded, his expression calm but firm. "I just wanted to introduce myself properly." Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his military ID card, the same one she'd barely glanced at hours earlier, and held it out for her to see. The golden insignia gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the terminal. "My name is Admiral Marcus Thompson. I've served in the U.S. Navy for over 25 years. Karen froze, her mouth half open as she stared at the ID card. The color drained from her face, and for the first time since they'd met, she looked genuinely flustered. Oh, I didn't realize," she stammered, her voice trailing off. Behind her, the other gate agent shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the awkwardness radiating from Karen. "No, you didn't," Marcus replied evenly, slipping the ID back into his pocket. "And that's exactly the problem. You made assumptions about me based on how I look, not who I am. That kind of behavior isn't just disrespectful, it's harmful." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she fidgeted with the strap of her bag, avoiding eye contact. Around them, passengers slowed down to watch the exchange. Some looked sympathetic toward Marcus, while others shot disapproving glances at Karen. A businessman standing nearby muttered under his breath, "She really messed up this time." Marcus didn't stop there. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only Karen and those closest could hear. "People like you use your position to make others feel small. You dismissed me at the gate, then mocked me during the flight. Did you think I wouldn't notice, or did you assume I wouldn't say anything?" Karen's cheeks flushed red, and she glanced around nervously, aware that all eyes were on her. "Sir, I'm sorry if I offended you," she managed to choke out, though her apology sounded hollow even to her own ears. "It wasn't personal." "It doesn't have to be personal to be wrong," Marcus countered gently but firmly. "What you did reflects a bigger issue, a pattern of treating people differently based on stereotypes. And trust me, it happens more often than you might think." By now, a small crowd had gathered, smartphones in hand, recording the confrontation. Someone whispered, "This is going viral," while another passenger nodded approvingly. Marcus ignored the cameras, focusing instead on Karen. He wasn't here for drama or revenge. He wanted her to understand the impact of her actions. This wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been treated unfairly because of someone else's biases. As the realization sank in, Karen seemed to shrink under the weight of the situation. Her confident facade crumbled, leaving behind a woman who suddenly looked very small and unsure of herself. Marcus took a step back, giving her space to process what had happened. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there amidst the murmurs of onlookers. For Marcus, this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. Confronting Karen wasn't about humiliating her. It was about holding up a mirror to society, showing how easily prejudice could slip into everyday interactions. As he strode through the terminal, his shoulders squared and his head held high, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight against injustice wasn't always loud or dramatic, but every act of courage mattered. And today, Marcus had chosen to stand tall, proving once again that dignity and respect are earned, not given. The video of Marcus confronting Karen spread like wildfire. Within hours, snippets of their exchange at the gate and later in the terminal were circulating on social media platforms, accompanied by hashtags like #RespectAndDignity and #StandAgainstBias. People couldn't get enough of the calm, composed Navy Admiral calling out prejudice in real time. Comment sections lit up with messages of support for Marcus and outrage toward Karen's behavior. Some viewers praised his restraint and professionalism, while others expressed frustration that incidents like this still happened in 2023. For Marcus, the sudden attention was overwhelming, but not entirely unexpected. By the next morning, his phone buzzed nonstop with notifications, texts from friends, emails from reporters seeking interviews, and even a call from a senior officer at the Pentagon, congratulating him on handling the situation with grace. While he appreciated the kind words, Marcus knew the focus shouldn't be on him alone. This moment wasn't just about one man standing up to discrimination. It was about shining a light on systemic issues that affected countless people every day. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled to respond. News outlets picked up the story, criticizing the company for allowing such behavior to go unchecked. Passengers who had witnessed the incident chimed in online, sharing their perspectives and adding fuel to the fire. One traveler tweeted, "I was on that flight. The gate agent treated Admiral Thompson horribly. It was blatant disrespect, and it made me sick to watch." Another wrote, "This is why so many people don't trust airlines. They need to do better." Under mounting pressure, the airline released a public statement apologizing for Karen's conduct and announcing her immediate termination. "We hold ourselves to the highest standards of professionalism and inclusivity," the statement read. "What happened on this flight does not reflect our values, and we are taking swift action to ensure accountability." While some applauded the decision, others felt it wasn't enough. Critics argued that firing Karen didn't address the root problem: systemic biases embedded within institutions. For Marcus, this sentiment resonated deeply. He understood that one person's actions were often symptoms of larger cultural issues. Firing Karen might make headlines, but it wouldn't erase years of ingrained prejudice or prevent similar incidents in the future. Determined to use this platform for good, Marcus agreed to speak at a national veterans event scheduled for later that week. Standing before an audience of service members, community leaders, and families, he delivered a powerful speech about the importance of recognizing and challenging bias wherever it appeared. Discrimination isn't always loud or obvious, he said, his voice steady and commanding. Sometimes it's subtle, a glance, a tone, a dismissive comment. But those small moments add up, creating barriers that keep people from reaching their full potential. He went on to share personal stories from his career, recounting times when he'd faced skepticism or outright hostility simply because of his race. Yet through it all, he emphasized resilience and perseverance. "We can't control how others treat us," he told the crowd. "But we can control how we respond. And sometimes responding means speaking up, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who deserves respect and fairness." The room erupted in applause, and Marcus felt a surge of gratitude. He wasn't naive enough to believe one speech could change the world, but he hoped it would inspire others to take a stand against injustice in their own lives. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached him to shake his hand or share their own experiences with discrimination. A young cadet thanked him for being a role model, saying, "Seeing you handle that situation gave me hope. I want to lead with the same strength and integrity someday." As the days turned into weeks, the impact of Marcus's actions continued to ripple outward. The airline implemented mandatory diversity training programs for its employees, incorporating lessons learned from the incident. Social media campaigns encouraged travelers to report discriminatory behavior, empowering passengers to hold companies accountable. And Marcus, he returned to his duties as a Navy Admiral, carrying with him the knowledge that even in moments of frustration, courage and dignity could spark meaningful change. For Marcus, this experience reinforced something he'd always believed. Progress wasn't achieved overnight, but every step forward mattered. Whether it was confronting a gate agent, addressing a packed auditorium, or mentoring the next generation of leaders, he remained committed to breaking down barriers. One conversation, one action, one life at a time. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's story became a beacon of hope and resilience for many. Letters poured in from across the country, some typed neatly on official letterheads, others handwritten with heartfelt sincerity. A retired teacher from Ohio wrote about how his speech had inspired her to start volunteering with organizations promoting racial equality. "You reminded me that change begins with small actions," she said. "I may not be able to fix everything, but I can do my part." A young sailor stationed overseas sent a note saying he'd hung Marcus's photo in his bunk as motivation. "Your courage gives me strength when things feel impossible," the sailor wrote. Even strangers who had never met Marcus reached out, sharing their own experiences of discrimination and thanking him for standing up, not just for himself, but for everyone who felt unseen or unheard. The attention wasn't without its challenges, though. Some critics dismissed the incident as overblown, accusing Marcus of seeking publicity or exaggerating what they called a simple misunderstanding. Others defended Karen, arguing that mistakes happen and she didn't deserve to lose her job. But Marcus refused to let negativity derail him. He knew not everyone would agree with his perspective, and that was okay. What mattered most was staying true to his values and using this moment to drive meaningful conversations forward. One particularly memorable interaction came during a live television interview. The host asked Marcus if he thought firing Karen was too harsh a punishment. His response was thoughtful yet firm. "This isn't about punishing one person," he explained. "It's about accountability. When someone in a position of authority behaves in a way that harms others, it sends a message, not just to those directly affected, but to everyone watching. If we don't address these behaviors, they'll continue unchecked." His words struck a chord, prompting viewers to reflect on their own roles in combating bias. Parents shared clips of the interview with their children, using it as a teaching moment about empathy and fairness. Teachers incorporated the story into classroom discussions about systemic racism and allyship. Even corporations began revisiting their policies, ensuring employees were trained to recognize and challenge discriminatory practices. Back home, Marcus found solace in the quieter moments. Late at night, after the emails stopped pinging and the news cycle moved on, he'd sit by the window with a cup of coffee, reflecting on everything that had unfolded. It amazed him how one seemingly ordinary day could spark such widespread change. Yet he also knew the work was far from finished. Racism wasn't something that could be solved overnight. It required constant effort, vigilance, and collaboration. To keep the momentum going, Marcus partnered with a nonprofit organization focused on diversity and inclusion. Together, they launched an initiative aimed at educating businesses and schools about unconscious bias. Through workshops, panel discussions, and online resources, they encouraged people to examine their assumptions and take actionable steps toward creating more equitable environments. Marcus traveled extensively for speaking engagements, meeting individuals who were eager to learn and grow. At one event, a middle-aged man approached him after his talk, visibly emotional. "I used to think racism was only about big, obvious acts, hate crimes or slurs," the man admitted. "But hearing your story made me realize how much harm smaller biases can cause. I want to do better. Where do I start?" Marcus smiled warmly, appreciating the honesty. "Start by listening," he advised. "Listen to the experiences of others without judgment. Educate yourself about history and its impact on today's world. And most importantly, speak up when you see injustice, even if it feels uncomfortable. Change starts with each of us." As the months passed, Marcus noticed subtle shifts in the way people interacted with him. Strangers greeted him with genuine warmth, often referencing his story as a reminder of perseverance. Colleagues sought his advice on fostering inclusivity within their teams. Even the airline reached out, inviting him to consult on their new diversity training program, a role he accepted graciously. Through it all, Marcus remained grounded, drawing strength from his family, faith, and lifelong commitment to service. He understood that while he couldn't single-handedly dismantle centuries of inequality, he could contribute to building a better future, one conversation, one policy, one act of kindness at a time. For Marcus, the fight against prejudice wasn't a burden. It was a calling, and one he embraced wholeheartedly. Months had passed since the incident on the plane, but its impact lingered like ripples in a pond, spreading farther than Marcus could have imagined. The viral video of his confrontation with Karen had sparked conversations in homes, workplaces, and classrooms across the country. It wasn't just about one gate agent or one Navy admiral. It was about the everyday battles people fought against bias and discrimination. And while Marcus knew this fight wouldn't end anytime soon, he felt hopeful knowing that progress, no matter how slow, was still progress. One crisp autumn morning, Marcus found himself standing in front of a packed auditorium at a national leadership summit. The theme of the event was Courage in Action, and he had been invited to deliver the keynote speech. As he stepped onto the stage, the room erupted into applause, a mix of admiration, gratitude, and respect. He smiled humbly, scanning the diverse crowd before him. There were young professionals eager to make their mark, seasoned leaders looking for inspiration, and community advocates determined to create change. "Thank you," Marcus began, his voice calm but commanding. "When I boarded that flight months ago, I didn't expect my day to turn into a lesson in accountability. But life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" The audience chuckled softly, leaning in as if hanging on his every word. He went on to share reflections from his journey, the challenges he'd faced, the lessons he'd learned, and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. "Discrimination isn't always loud," he reminded them. "Sometimes it's quiet, a glance, a tone, an assumption. But those small moments shape our world. They tell us who belongs and who doesn't. And when we let those moments slide, we send a message that they're acceptable." His words resonated deeply. After the speech, dozens of attendees lined up to speak with him personally. A young woman tearfully thanked him for giving her the courage to address a biased comment made by her boss. A veteran shared how Marcus's story inspired him to mentor underprivileged youth in his community. Each interaction reinforced the power of leading by example, not through grand gestures, but through consistent acts of integrity and compassion. Back home, Marcus continued his work with a nonprofit organization, helping businesses develop strategies to combat systemic bias. One company implemented a new policy requiring managers to undergo annual diversity training, while another created employee resource groups to foster inclusivity. These changes may have seemed small, but Marcus understood their significance. Every step forward mattered, no matter how incremental. On quieter days, Marcus spent time reflecting on his own growth. This experience had taught him patience, not just with others, but with himself. He realized that even someone as accomplished as him wasn't immune to frustration or self-doubt. What set him apart was his ability to channel those emotions into action, turning moments of injustice into opportunities for education and connection. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, his phone buzzed with a text from his teenage daughter. She'd seen a social media post praising his efforts and wanted to know if she could share it with her friends. "Of course," Marcus replied, smiling. "Tell them your dad's proud to stand up for what's right. And so should they be." As the years went by, Marcus became more than just a Navy admiral. He became a symbol of resilience and hope. His story served as a reminder that courage didn't require perfection, it required persistence. While racism and prejudice remained persistent forces in society, Marcus believed in the power of collective action. Every person who spoke up, listened, or took a stand contributed to building a fairer, kinder world. And so Marcus kept moving forward, mentoring, speaking, and advocating. He knew the road ahead would be long, but he also knew he wasn't walking it alone. With each passing day, he saw glimmers of change. A child learning empathy, a leader embracing accountability, a stranger choosing kindness over judgment. These small victories fueled his determination to keep pushing forward. For Marcus, the journey wasn't about reaching a destination. It was about leaving footprints along the way, guiding others toward a brighter future. And as he looked out at the horizon, he felt a deep sense of purpose. The fight wasn't over, but every step counted. And Marcus intended to take as many steps as it took to ensure the path became smoother for generations to come.